Local programming on KRWG Public Media made possible in part by viewers like you. Thank you.
Welcome to Your Legislators, a production of KRWG Public Media. Your Legislators is a public service program providing our viewing audience in southern New Mexico the opportunity to hear about important legislative issues directly from their elected representatives in Santa Fe.
Hello and welcome to Your Legislators here on KRWG Public Media. I'm your host, Anthony Moreno. Joining us from Santa Fe to talk about the legislative session is District 38 Republican State Representative Rebecca Dow. Representative Dow is serving in her second term in office. She joins us now to talk about legislation she is working on, as well as sharing her thoughts on issues facing her district and the state. Representative Dow, thank you so much for joining us.
Good morning, Anthony. Thank you for the opportunity to be here.
Well, we're glad to have you joining us from Santa Fe. Thanks for stepping out and being able to join us here for this interview. Now, you are working on education as we're taping this interview. I'd like to hear kind of your thoughts on a couple of bills that is coming before a committee as we're taping this. Can you share with us those bills and how you think it's going to impact your district and the state?
Well, I mean, of course, the biggest thing that we're trying to do is respond to the lawsuit. And the lawsuit has said that we have got to do whatever is necessary to provide adequate funding so that we can improve our student outcomes, particularly as it pertains to those students who are defined as at-risk and minority. And so for my district, which is one of the poorest districts in the state, it's a Title I district, free and reduced meals, very low income, and a lot of children that are in crisis, you know, with their adverse childhood experiences, their home situations, a very high substance abuse rate, a very high rate of domestic violence, lack of home and food security. So obviously I'll be advocating for my district and the needs of my district. And the way I look at it, which might be a little bit different than most of the proposals that we're seeing, is that CYFD and higher education should be part of the response to this lawsuit. So I don't just only see PED as the answer to the solution, what happens during the child's school day, but also higher education, because the quality of our staff, the quality of our workforce is a very high indicator of student success. So how do we support higher ed, make sure that they have the capacity and the resources they need to prepare our workforce, help us get teachers who are qualified and have the specialized training they need to move the needle on student outcomes during the school day. And of course, CYFD, when we talk about at-risk children, that's the branch of government that addresses the things that are happening outside the school day. And they are underfunded, they have shortfalls, over 200 vacancies in child protective services. We don't have adequate access to high quality early childhood yet. We are underfunding the CYFD side of that, home visiting, infant mental health. So to me, children are able to succeed during the school day when what's happening outside the school day is addressed. And that's, are they safe and secure? Are their basic needs met? So when they arrive at school, they're ready to learn. So I've got a lot of bills that focus on the whole child, and that includes the family. Parents are the #1 indicator of student success.
So you feel that there's a great need for early childhood education and care in the state of New Mexico?
I do agree that there's a huge need for early childhood education. And well, research defines early childhood as prenatal to 8 years of age. And in New Mexico, 80% of our abuse and neglect is happening 0 to 3. So yes, I think we need a very healthy, robust program that addresses healthy families from the time a mom finds out she's pregnant until her child enters school, so that when they enter school, they're ready to succeed. I don't think that a single silo school day program, in our state we're calling it New Mexico Pre-K, is going to move the needle on student outcomes if we haven't addressed those needs when that child is not in school yet. So 0 to 3 is where 90% of learning occurs. It's where the majority of abuse and neglect is occurring. So when we talk about priorities for at-risk children, CYFD should be a partner in the response to the lawsuit.
Now, one of the proposals in the legislature to address early childhood care and also education is by establishing a new department to really take those on. And State Senator Michael Padilla has proposed that. There has been some support for that. I'd like to hear your thoughts on how you feel about that.
Well, I think he is definitely innovative, and he's on the right track here. And I think what he's proposing is a solution to a problem of us duplicating or supplanting or lack of coordination. And so that idea is, I really respect him, and he's very passionate about improving the quality of lives for families in New Mexico. And so I think where he's coming is innovative and could be effective. As a conservative Republican, do I want to see yet another government agency? Not necessarily, but I do want to see the coordination of that. And I look back at the days of Bill Richardson when Diane Dinish was in charge of the Children's Cabinet, and that brought all the same players to the table through the Children's Cabinet, and they were coordinating, and they were working together, collaborating, assuring that we weren't supplanting or duplicating efforts, and that worked because of leadership. So I think this agency could work with the right leadership, as could the existing structures that are there, be it the Children's Cabinet or the Early Learning Advisory Council, which are already in statute, but they haven't had the leadership they've needed, and they haven't been engaged in the level that the statutes would allow. So they have been ineffective. People see a need. But so, the agency or a robust Children's Cabinet or an active and engaged Early Learning Advisory Council does need to happen.
Well, what are your concerns about establishing a new department and also, all these other agencies having a say in what's happening in early childhood care and also education? Is this possibly a sustainable option? Let's look down the road. If a Republican governor comes in and a Republican state legislature, would this department exist? Would they cut it just like they got rid of the Children's Cabinet?
That's a really good point. I mean, the coordination needs to happen. We absolutely need to address the issue, and we need to have something that's sustainable long term. I'm not opposed to the agency. And you bring up a good point. Changes in leadership bring changes of priorities, and so do we need an agency to make sure the priority works? I have not seen new agencies established. I'm a sophomore this year, and so I look at the cost of growing government versus direct services to children. So I agree. We have got to do something to address coordination, and we have several options, and that agency is one of them. I'm not opposed to it.
Okay, now one of the other things that you mentioned that you feel that too much pressure is being put on PED with some of these proposals. You talked a lot about coordination. You've been in Santa Fe for, this is your third session, I believe. So as far as coordination between agencies, what are your thoughts on that and the potential success with that?
Yeah, well, again, I think that coordination is successful because of leadership, and I'm really optimistic. I love, I'm really excited about both the CYFD and the PED appointment for Cabinet Secretary, and I believe that they are going to pursue coordination at the leadership of the governor, with or without the agency. And I've had a chance to meet with very, very briefly with the Secretary of Department of Health and the Secretary of Higher Ed. I haven't got to really hear their heart and what their vision is. But I mean, I think that the idea of the agency addresses a need that has not been happening consistently.
Now
but could happen without an agency.
Okay, I got you. Now
through leadership. Yeah.
Okay. We were talking about early childhood education and also well-being. Obviously, child poverty is a major issue, especially in your county. Your county, Doña County, Luna County are in the top 10 poorest counties ranked in the top 10 for child poverty. What are some of the things that you think really need to happen to make sure that we don't have so many children living in poverty here in the state? And is there any legislation you're working on to address that?
Well, I'm working on a couple of things that I hope will address the need in rural New Mexico. And one of those, it is a tax increase, but it's a local option, so it would go to the voters, and they could set aside a percentage of 1% of a tax, half of 1%, to go towards economic development initiatives. So for example, in Sierra County, the voters took that decision in Doña on the spaceport. And for the county that I represent, that's in that district, Sierra County, we have 24 people who work full-time at Spaceport America, and it's generating money for our schools. And we've sold homes. People are moving into town, even as we speak, that are working at the spaceport who have high earning incomes and are contributing to the community. So you think about 24 jobs in a community like Sierra County, that's a pretty big, you add a multiplier, that's a pretty significant impact. And the majority of the community said, we did right by voting for the spaceport. If nothing else, the funds that it's brought to our school district. And so this would be another opportunity. There was an opportunity that came along for recycling.
I'd like to stop right there if we could.
Okay.
You mentioned the spaceport. I'm kind of curious on your perspective as a conservative Republican. How do you feel about that GRT tax being permanent?
Yeah, well, so I was not there when the Spaceport Initiative was implemented, so I don't know, and I'm glad that it happened, but I would probably not have ever voted for the $200 million infrastructure in the first place on taxpayer dimes. But it's there. I inherited it, and the capital and the infrastructure is already there. So the state continues to invest, from the state budget, $4 million a year. Sometimes there's capital outlay requests. And that's we're spending $50 million a year on the rail runner. So when I think, or the Spaceport Museum in Alamogordo, I think we supplement it. It's multiple millions that we supplement that museum to keep it open. So in the big scheme of things, I think it's a reasonable investment that's being made, especially when you consider that space enterprise is a $388 billion a year industry, and we're still ahead of the curve. Our advantages at the spaceport, we are still ahead of every other spaceport in the U.S. if we continue to recruit and invest and be intentional about marketing and the investments that we have there towards where the industry growth is.
Do you have any concerns? Do you have some concerns right now? I mean, in the news, it's been reported that Virgin Galactic laid off 40 plus employees. So does that
which
have
sounds really
some
bad.
concerns?
But actually, that's really exciting for New Mexico because the staff that they laid off were in the development stage. So they were the developers of the ship. That phase, they're moving from that phase of the research and development into the launch. So the folks who are working at Mojave who are in the development stage of it are no longer That was a misleading article in my opinion because of the layoff. It's a transition. So those folks were laid off, but their net gain of employees will come to New Mexico. And I've heard numbers from 40 to 100 by the end of the year, new employees that will be living most likely in Doñana, but they expect about 20% to live within my district.
I mean, space is so exciting. It's an exciting industry. You mentioned how much money is involved with it, but it's also one of the riskiest industries that exist here, not only in our country, but across the world. Does that concern you at all? The state has invested so much money, but it's also risky?
It is risky, and it is the final frontier. And what's exciting is the public-private partnerships that are occurring. We think about the $220 million investment that New Mexico's made in space enterprise versus Virgin Galactic's billions of dollars. I mean, they have privately invested billions of dollars. So I don't even know what percentage that is. We're not even at 1% of 1% of their investment, not to mention the other 4 tenants that we have there. They're also privately investing millions and millions of dollars every year in this risky enterprise.
Okay, now I want to move on and talk about your work on economic development a little bit more. You obviously sit on the House Commerce and Economic Development Committee. What pieces of legislation have you seen so far that you're really excited about helping New Mexico gain its economic footing, which it's been struggling to do since the Great Recession?
Well, as far as my district, which is a very rural district, so far, it's been more about raising the voice of the impact some of these bills would the unintended consequences in rural New Mexico. So I haven't seen any that I'm tremendously excited about yet, but I see some that I do think have opportunity, and one would be the Solo Worker Project. And this is a project where you take people who are underemployed or maybe lacking some skills, bring them in for a training program where they can have employment remotely. So they are placed with a job that they do through computer, but there's a shared space where they can work together, where they can be encouraged and supported, come to a work day and help them move off of assistance and become self-sufficient. There's opportunities there. I think there's some technical issues in the way that the money is flowing that we discussed in committee, and I hope that will be addressed by the Economic Development Department so that rural communities can receive these monies in a way that they can leverage their other resources. Right now it's a reimbursement for fee only, and that's difficult for small communities to even front.
One of the things that the state is really pushing towards is investing in attracting film to New Mexico. Now, I know that there's been film projects on location in your district before.
There has, yeah.
I was wondering, how do you feel about the state investing in film with the money, the tax credits that they're providing, and also they're talking about even extending the cap. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, the current suggestion is not to extend the cap, it's to remove the cap.
Yeah.
And right now we're giving $50 million a year in tax credit to folks who come and invest in New Mexico film. And we have a backlog it's got a $50 million a year tax, but you can apply for it into the future. So we have a $300 million backlog with the cap. And so New Mexico has a balanced budget. We are required to pass a balanced budget. If we removed the cap, then we would have no way to know what our annual operating budget would be or how to pass a balanced budget. So though I'm open to considering raising the cap, I definitely don't think we should remove the cap. And it's difficult for me when we talk about the highest income earners, we need to tax them at a higher rate. We need to close the loophole on corporate taxes. And yet, folks like Netflix and some of the people who are coming to film here are among the wealthiest people in the world. And so Netflix is here. The questions I asked they are here. They've made a present, they've made an investment, and they did that with the cap. And so why do we need to remove the cap to encourage Netflix, who's already here, to invest? Well, the new Secretary of Economic Development said there's 2 more companies in the works, and that they would only come to New Mexico if we remove the cap. I don't know if that's true. A lot of states are starting to remove any sort of incentive at all, and we're moving forward with a larger incentive. I need to learn more about that. I'm not totally against it, but I'm the only member there's 10 members in commerce and industry. I'm the only one from a rural district. So I'm always looking at where are the dollars going, and every time the vast majority of dollars are staying in Albuquerque and Santa Fe. And so yesterday we looked at the LEDA, Legislative Economic Development Initiative, and JTIP, which supplements wages for startups for high-wage jobs and new investments in growth and business. And in the jobs that are in the works, one is in rural New Mexico, and they were defining urban as a population of 60,000 or more. And so, I asked, what are we doing to get the dollars into rural New Mexico? And that'll continue to be my question. There are so many incentives and so disparity in those getting to the rural areas. So I'm looking for ways to get those dollars into rural New Mexico. Even with our legislative capital outlay, if I wanted to put a railroad spur in Sierra County so that we could have some manufacturing or industry, then it would take years and years for my capital outlay. I get the same amount as any other representative, but it's divided between 3 counties. Some of those that are from more rural areas are dividing it between 5 and 6 counties.
Yeah, now I mean, we've been talking about how risky space may be. Now, film is also a risky industry as well, so it's great to hear your thoughts on that. I'm kind of curious, how do you feel as a Republican representative that the state is investing heavily in risky industries like that?
Excuse me, I am so sorry, I have allergies. It's difficult as a conservative Republican, but I'd rather see us investing in things that can grow our tax base than simply just taxing our existing infrastructure. We are one of a few states that have more people who need assistance from the state than those that are contributing to our tax base. So, there's some proposals out there that say we're going to grow our government budget by taxing people more and taxing the existing businesses more. And that way we'll have more tax dollars to spend. If it's between that and making an investment in new economic opportunities that grow our revenue, our tax revenues, I'm definitely for the latter.
Now, there's been a lot of talk about raising the minimum wage in New Mexico, going from $10 an hour to eventually $12 an hour. What are your thoughts?
Oh, some are for $15 an hour. Don't forget that.
Well, I want to hear your perspective on that.
Yeah. Well, I do think that we need a modest raise in our minimum wage. I think that's a reasonable thing to do. And again, I think there's more representative for metropolitan areas where the average worker is already earning $10 to $12 an hour. That's not the case in rural New Mexico. And this week, today actually, we'll be voting on the minimum wage that raises the wage to $12 with a permanent and perpetual inflation factor. So it doesn't stop at 12. It will never stop. But when I consider that bill, it also has the tipped wage earner in there. It raises the tipped wage to $10 an hour, I believe, maybe 12. And we have been hearing from restaurants all week long, especially those in rural New Mexico, saying, I cannot keep my business open with this amount.
So how do you find that balance then? How do you find that balance between raising the minimum wage but not hurting local businesses?
Right, exactly. So in metropolitan areas, this is completely doable, and I believe they could roll it out. They are saying that they could roll it out with a lot more ease than rural New Mexico. I represent rural New Mexico. They are saying you're going to close my business. I'm barely hanging on as it is. So between the new regulations or a new tax that I'm going to have to pay, along with an increased minimum wage, it's more than what my small business can bear. So I cannot support the change in the tipped wage. And of course, I can't support a $12 minimum wage that has a permanent inflation factor that, again, how do we budget? How do businesses budget? How do we create a stable environment for businesses in New Mexico? A modest increase. And on that point, I did introduce a bill earlier this week. It's called Provider Parity Pay Bill. And so many of the businesses in rural New Mexico are actually working on behalf of the government. They're senior meal sites, domestic violence, homeless shelters, nursing homes, home health, doing personal care, child care centers serving low-income at-risk children. And here's this state-imposed minimum wage without a single dollar in the budget to raise the contracts or the fee or to compensate a higher rate to the people who we are paying to serve our most vulnerable population. So we're hearing from folks in Las Cruces now that the minimum wage went up to 10.10, that they're moving outside the limits so that they can keep their home health businesses open. And they can do that because their providers are working in homes, but a child care center can't move outside the boundaries of the minimum wage, and we did not raise their compensation for providing services on behalf of our most vulnerable children.
Now, you own and operate a child care center, is that correct?
I don't own, I founded a nonprofit,
Okay.
and I'm not an employee anymore, I'm still a consultant with them, but yes, I founded a nonprofit, and Truth or Consequences, and it's a nonprofit child care center because parents cannot pay the cost of quality care. In fact, last year, parent fees represented about 14% of our budget, and the rest we have to do through contracts, fees for services, fundraisers, donor development, and I would say we could still use more funds to increase our quality, and of course compensate our staff at a much better rate.
So I'd like to hear a little bit more about that because we talked obviously earlier about early childhood care. You live in a rural area, so childhood care may be limited, and it is limited certainly in the eastern part of the state and
Sure.
other rural areas as well. So how do you feel that government, state government, can really play a role in addressing that issue and making it possible for more early childhood care opportunities and facilities to be open?
Yeah, so let's start with the federal government. New Mexico, because of the number of rural areas and the low-income families in our state, we are eligible for Head Start dollars. And the Head Start standards are the model of New Mexico pre-K. It was the standards from Head Start that were used in New Mexico pre-K standards, or the CYFD, the Child Care Star 5 Focus standards. Those are the New Mexico pre-K standards. And so even though our state is eligible for over $100 million a year in Head Start funding, which 100% federal dollars, serves the most at-risk children, we are only drawing down around 58. In fact, we're reverting around $1.5 million a year as we close Head Start centers because we expand pre-K across the state. So first, I would say we should fully utilize our federal dollars. We have military child care dollars on the table that we barely touch. We have Head Start dollars that can grow at a much higher rate. And the Child Care Development Block Grant Fund, which is federal, requires a state match, but it has a very significant state investment. So before we start supplanting federal dollars, let's first fully utilize them. And that's a response to the lawsuit. We're going to expand early childhood, expand access to pre-K, which is 0 to 5, so that children are ready to succeed at school by fully utilizing the federal dollars. Then at the state level, the New Mexico pre-K statute says that we will not supplant Head Start and we will not supplant child care centers that are Star 4 or Star 5. So when we talk about the new agency, already in statute, the law says that CYFD and PED will get together, coordinate, map out what exists, and only expand where there's gaps. And so if we just honored those two things, fully utilizing our federal dollars, and first doing no harm to our existing high-quality early childhood programs, then that would be a very good step in sustaining and growing childcare. Right now, we're actually closing down child care centers and Head Start centers. A national study shows that 121 child care centers closed in New Mexico over the last 18 months, and that would include our Head Start programs.
Do you think right now the state and the federal government are on the same page when it comes to early childhood education?
I think the intended outcomes, that we make sure that children are born healthy, that they're safe and secure, and that they enter school ready to succeed is a shared goal. I do not think that the state is aligned with, actually from the Obama administration, a lot of the reauthorization from Every Student Succeed Act and from the reauthorization of the Child Care Development Block Grant, and expansion of Health and Human Services at the federal level, really focused on collaboration and communication and coordination between existing providers. In fact, CYFD just received $5 million to do just that. Slow down a little, study and coordinate, find out where your gaps are. Is it quality of staff? Is it buildings? Is it training and professional development? Is it the curriculum standards? And where do you move forward, and so that you can assure that your standards are continuing to produce the outcomes you're looking at? What New Mexico has been doing is just slots, more slots, more slots, more slots. And we actually have a child care crisis that we're creating, not only because we can't, when a new pre-K program opens in a public education department, they go to the child care center to hire the qualified staff. I mean, PED already has like 8,000 teachers that are on waivers or long-term subs. So where would they find early childhood teachers? Well, the state of New Mexico has been investing in high-quality early childhood for the past 15 years through their quality rating scale initiative, and that comes with scholarships to pay for early childhood degrees. So, for example, at Apple Tree, the organization that I founded, we lost 6 teachers between public school expansion of pre-K and home visiting expansion. There's nowhere to get the workforce except from the child care center. And I'm also concerned that that could happen with CYFD. There's proposals out there for 200 new social workers in the public school. CYFD already has 280 vacancies. Where would they get those social workers if not from CYFD? And the disparity in pay would make it just an incredible incentive to go to PED, which not against improving PED, but how can we coordinate and collaborate, not supplant, but yet strengthen all the systems that help us grow healthy children and address the needs of at-risk kids so that they can learn during the school day.
Okay, thank you so much, State Representative Rebecca Dow, for joining us on Your Legislators.
Thank you so much for having me.
And we want to thank you for joining us for the program, and we will see you next time right here on KRWG Public Media. Remember, you can always stay updated with the latest news at krwg.org, and we want to hear your story ideas for not only this program, but others. You can send us your thoughts and story ideas to feedback@nmsu.edu. I'm Anthony Moreno. We'll see you next time.